So this panel is about the new power of privacy. And if you're thinking, oh, privacy, God, I promise this will be interesting because actually, privacy is going through a lot right now. There's a lot happening. It's going to be a fascinating panel. Let's kick off with introductions. Ben, I'll come to you first, please.
Thanks. Hello, everyone. I'm Benjamin. I'm working for Ogury, where I run publisher partnership, programmatic partnership, and operations. And Ogury is doing and providing privacy-first solution to brand agencies and publishers through different data layers. That's it.
Great, thank you. Will.
Hiya. I'm Will from the Media Trust. We provide digital trust and safety services to predominantly ad tech companies and digital publishers. So I suppose really that means that we help to protect consumers online on behalf of our clients for some of the things that can go wrong in the digital ad economy.
Great, thank you. Domenico.
Hello everyone, Domenico or Mimo, Condé Nast. I am Associate Director of Global Ad Analytics.
Claire.
And I'm Clare O'Brien from Isbar, until recently head of media, but Dan Larden's taken over that role, and I get the luxury of doing things like this less frequently.
You get out and about more, basically.
Sorry?
You get out and about more now.
Yeah. No, I know. It's great, they've let me out.
And finally, Radha.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Radha, and I'm the data ethics or data privacy and governance lead at Shell, essentially making sure that our privacy program overlays and integrates successfully with our ad tech and martech stack.
Great, thank you very much. And before we get into the thick of things, I'm going to open up a Q&A to the audience. So as before, please go into the ExchangeWire app, into the agenda, select this session. You'll see the Q&A tab at the top. The questions are anonymous, and if you see a question that you like the look of, you can upvote it. And the most popular question I will ask our wonderful panel here. So let's kick into things. Like I said, privacy some people can eye roll, others can be like, yes, this is so important for us at the moment. There's a lot happening. At the moment, we've got the situation where we have tightening privacy regulation, a greater scarcity of IDs and looking into alternatives. How can we balance compliance with seamless advertising experiences? And what role are alternative to IDs playing in this? Ben, I'm going to come to you first on this one.
Yeah, sure. So I think as an industry, we have been doing a lot, and a lot has been done in the past few years thanks to contextual and semantic analysis. I genuinely believe that, using those signals is super powerful. However, I believe, and we believe at Ogury, that using those signals is not enough if you want to provide an effective experience. So I think also considering how powerful can other signals can be. So I'm thinking about the bitstream data and also potentially some other data. Typically, we offer and we do like survey data, which is pretty much zero-party data. I think it's thanks to the combination of those different data layers that you can provide an effective experience while ensuring you're staying privacy and privacy first and compliant.
Interesting. And Mimo, from the publisher perspective, how are you grappling that?
So I would start saying that I'm not quite sure there is a scarcity of IDs. We've seen a proliferation of IDs in the run-up to the cookie deprecation. I think one big challenge we have with that is that, is failing the programmatic promises of targeting measurement at scale. So that's definitely something the industry is grappling with. There is obviously a bunch of different sort of possibility that we have now. Zero-party data could be an option. Contextual, definitely. It does solve part of the marketing funnel, I would say. The upper funnel speaks more and caters more for that. So I think one of the challenges, obviously, is trying to find targeting solution that can be scaled and that can be compliant from a privacy perspective, obviously. And publishers are at the forefront of that and investing on that a lot.
Absolutely. And Radha, as well, from your situation on the buy side and where you are leading on the governance and privacy side of things, how are you finding that this is coming to bear? How is it looking for you?
I think ultimately the first question is we need to build that trust and transparency with our customers. And looking at the supply chain as it is it really optimal regardless of the deprecation of cookies? And then once we've established what a successful supply chain would look like, it's then thinking about what privacy-preserving technologies you need to integrate into the already quite large tech landscape that you're navigating with. Yes, of course, IDs are a solution, but they're probably not going to be the be-all and end-all. Looking at potential ways of contextual advertising, but how AI can integrate within that and really fuel the delivery of looking at the context and delivering on that. But I really do think you've got to look at the supply chain, because ultimately you want to give a good customer experience, and we're saying that we need to continue that good customer experience when the cookie deprecates. But if we really think about it, the customer experience customers are getting at the moment probably isn't premium or ultimately in their best interest. So looking at it as a whole.
Absolutely. And Claire, over to you. Kind of what conversations are you having with your members about cookie alternatives that are compliant with, with a privacy focus?
So we've been talking with our members about, the cookieless environment for years now, and sort of gradually layering up understanding of what alternatives are. And as part of that conversation, I think it's become clear as well, and it's come up so many times this morning in this conference, that actually we need to think about what the job of advertising is and how it works, and some of the stuff that Mike was just talking about, attention and the role that plays. Advertisers are interested in not clustering, but working out their solutions, because not every solution is going to be the same for every advertiser, just because different sectors operate in different ways and at different parts of the funnel at different times. And so I think that where we're settling on is that we're moving into a far more interesting advertising and marketing era, where ID doesn't form the tentpole of every single decision that's made, but we are working with a much richer texture, and there's a lot of old-fashioned marketing coming in that's being made to work in much more interesting ways because of new technology. And I think most of our members are quite optimistic, even though the job to grow this new skill, these new understandings, is actually quite vast in front of us.
Well, that's exciting. Good to hear some positivity amongst much negativity. Will, I want to come to you and talk about the balance of compliance with the user experience, because it doesn't necessarily feel like privacy and privacy focuses and user experience are that well aligned often. So how are we navigating that complexity?
Yeah, so we've got some buyers and we've got some publishers. I guess I'm kind of speaking on behalf of users, I suppose. I explained our business really is to help to protect consumers from things that can happen. So from a user perspective, nobody ever went to a website and said, this is the best website, I use it, it's just so compliant. Like that it's just not something.
You're not wrong.
It's just not something that exists. It's not how users think. And I think conversely, actually, a lot of the regulatory challenges that we find ourselves in are because the opposite is true. Consumers have gone to websites and said, well, what on earth is happening here? This experience is awful, perhaps my privacy is at stake. So what we're really saying is that the user experience of these environments is actually the only thing that really matters. Privacy is a foundational contribution to that experience, right? So it has to be compliant, or else if you're a premium publisher or you care about regulation, then you find yourselves in the crosshair. So let's assume all of those things are true for publishers. The question then becomes, having become compliant, what is it that I'm doing in my environment that keeps users coming back? Because that's how I pay the bills, that's how I curate environments. And so for us, particularly with our publishing partners, we will talk to them about that foundational layer of privacy, which is about discovery and obedience and all the things that you need to do in terms of regulation. But also being in touch with the curation of the entire environment, which is essentially your compliance, your content, and then your ad delivery. And the quality of that ad delivery in terms of the people that you invite to participate in the page, and also the way that you let them participate, are the things that govern the user experience. And going back to my original point, if that is terrible, the users will go to your site saying, this is terrible, I think there's a problem. If it's an excellent user experience, then the opposite is true. You start to build that relationship with consumers that if you are privacy sound, you can then start to layer on the other things that we're talking about that are revenue enabling. That's the way that we would see it.
And to come to the publisher and the buyer side, Mimo, from your perspective, as a publisher who is responsible for ensuring you get consent and ensuring you are making sure it's compliant and giving your readers a great user experience, how do you navigate that?
Yeah, it's definitely challenging. I will also add there is another element to the equation from a publisher perspective, which is the commercial impact. And it's an equally important one. So I think like publisher have to, at the forefront, obviously, publisher and brand, I would argue, obviously, at the forefront of the relationship with the users, customers, reader. And obviously, we have a responsibility. And it's obviously hard because, as we were saying, the compliance, like CMPs, the user experience is not great, right? But
You're being polite, I think, I would say. Yeah, you're being very polite.
But I would say, we need to strive to try and work on the user experience front because that will enable the better content experience. And if the content experience is gets better, then the user spends more time on the site, and obviously from an advertising perspective, their experience gets better. So yeah, I think it's definitely a threefold challenge for publishers.
Radha, similar kind of challenges on your side?
I'd say similar kind of challenges. I think our focus in this context would be how we can make sure that the consent management system is working as effectively as possible. But then also, how does it play into an education piece and having that dialogue with our customer and educating them along the journey on what it means to give consent when they could potentially change their consent if they wanted to give them a more flexible, hands-on approach. So yeah, education and awareness, and also rooted in our CMP strategy.
And Benjamin, you're nodding furiously. Where do you sit in all of this?
I mean, I think it's definitely, we believe into how powerful engaging directly with the audience can be. I think specifically when it comes to getting the right zero-party data, I definitely think that this can, make sure that this is as seamless as possible from the user, and at the same time, ensure that you get true intent preferences, but at the same time, making sure that you are not doing that on the personal basis, but by creating cohorts. I think it's the right way to a good sweet spot, in my opinion.
And there's a massive, massive education piece here, right? Across every single person in this. And Claire, I'll let you answer first when I've finished the question that I've now forgotten. But the education must be challenging in helping users understand the data and privacy piece, understanding what's happening with their data and how it's being used compliantly, while aligning that with a frankly fairly shit CMP experience.
I agree. And it is.
Good.
And every time I tell people what it is I do and what I'm involved in, they go, oh, God, all those privacy notices and, I hate being stalked and tracked. It really is, that creepy experience comes in. I think generally we're not a very digitally literate population. And I think we're definitely not a data literate population. People vaguely understand, what their data is, and what their potential rights are. But there's no joined up approach. And honestly, anyone who has sat and listened to me on one of these panels in the past 2 years know that I always try to say something about this, because I think that it's in all stakeholder interests to ensure that ordinary people, and they are human beings, we talk about consumers like they're units, these are human beings with people and futures and hopes and, like the rest of us, have a really updatable understanding of what their data is and what power and control they have over it. And I think it's beholden to all of us, whatever side of the divide we're on, to get involved in that education. It can only work if the same piece of education goes out and we're not having separate educational conversations with our customers and with our readers and, with our browser, tech providers. So everyone has to be involved in this conversation.
I want to understand from all of you where you think you sit in the responsibility of education. And actually, Claire, coming back to you kind of from the marketer, the advertiser side, given that they are the ones that are delivering advertising, and they're not, and the advertising they're delivering isn't necessarily on their owned and operated sites. It could be on Condé Nast, for example. How does their responsibility, where's their responsibility sit in conveying that and educating?
Well, I mean, I think, like Radha is saying, there's a huge global advertiser talking about the responsibility for educating customers and people who come to the website or respond to ads. That's a really important part of your brief, I understand that. It would be great if that was part of everyone's brief and that we were vaguely saying the same things to customers so that you build up layers of understanding so that people then, because ultimately the objective is for people to trust in advertising. And I think, it won't be news to anyone here that people are not trusting advertising. I mean, I think we sit below estate agents in terms of a trusted industry.
Oh, lovely.
And I think, one of the reasons is the creepiness that, my data, I'm not giving that, what are they going to do, who are they going to sell it to, why did I give that data away and someone else came and talked to me about this thing I'd never heard of before. It's that kind of behaviors that we need to tighten up and broadly have customers and people using our sites or apps being able to interrogate the industry back with a degree of knowledge and understanding and having a sensible, equalize the conversation, I suppose, on either side is
Absolutely.
what I'm thinking.
I totally agree. Well, when we spoke before, you put it quite nicely in that you said, I'm not going to repeat it eloquently, but we'll see what happens. You said that, when it comes to compliance, there are the things that people want to do, the things they feel they have to do, and the things they legally, from regulation perspective, need to do. How are those things being balanced with the education piece and ensuring that consumers, the human beings that Claire referred to, all of us, are actually understanding that? And it's all coming together nicely with what's being done from the compliance perspective.
Okay, a few parts to that. First thing around the education piece, let's have it right. The entire delivery of communication around obligation and comms around compliance has fallen on publishers, all of it. Assuming that people on the street do not read IAB press releases. And no offense to the IAB, they do a great job, but let's assume no one is doing that. So the entire communication of those obligations has fallen upon publishers. Publishers have many things to manage, and they seem to be carrying the burden of compliance on behalf of the entire sequential supply chain for ads. So that's a tough position to be in, so I think we need to cut them a little bit of slack around the complexities of CMPs and otherwise. I think what's been really quite interesting is some publishers being more front-footed around how they communicate that value, right? So really what we're trying to say is, if you like this content and you would like it to be free, then these are the ways in which we enable that revenue. If you would prefer for that not to happen, then these are the consequential decisions. And I don't really think that we've found a way for the consequential decisions to communicate back to consumers. I think it's really interesting the way guys like The Guardian have front-footed this approach. Some people say, it's a nag, but we pay serious journalists to produce serious content. If you'd like to read it for free, then here's the way that you need to do it. We've seen other people start to look at sort of pay or okay consent situations, which again I think is an innovative way of making that communication message, because as I say, users, normal people not in this room, don't really understand. They have the things that you explained, Claire. They have this feeling of creepiness, and it goes back to quality and environment. So linking all the way back to the start, what's important? Foundationally, privacy is important, or else you're going to find yourselves in trouble with the regulators. So let's assume that we've done that piece. How do you then build upon those things? Well, you need to build upon them in a way that makes your users, who are your revenue source, feel valued in that exchange. And you can do that overtly, or you can do that through some kind of, the curation of your environment. And for our customers, we see them going on different different spurs of that journey. But I think, publishers have got to be a little bit bolder in that, and we will always help to support those decisions because they've been on the end of quite a lot over the last decade, haven't they?
Indeed. Mimo, Mr. Publisher.
Yeah, absolutely.
Long lambasted. All responsibility lies on you. How are you navigating that? And what help do you need from everybody else?
Yeah, I think like obligations for publisher because obviously, publisher liable. And also, to go back to the conversation we were having before, as brands are the front-facing face, obviously. There is, lots of risk. Talk about commercial impact. So there's definitely like a risk, a revenue side, but also like reputational risk and regulatory risk. So obviously publishers are taking this very seriously. I think to go back to the educational piece, which I think is really important, absolutely like more collaboration, more cooperation. It's a very competitive market, but we should think about the, big picture. It's the open web versus like walled gardens, and how do we sort of cooperate to try and deliver that educational piece. We work in the advertising communication industry, and we have not been great at communicating the exchange, the value exchange with the users and the readers. So, I was looking at...
Except for The Guardian.
Well, yeah, they're great at doing that.
Other publishers are available. Other publishers are available.
Yeah.
Guardian and others, yes.
Yeah. But in general, if you look at things like Apple is doing, for example, they've got the old GTM positioning on privacy, obviously. But if you go and check out their privacy policy page, it's great. It's readable. It's fluid. They've run a video last year around a day in the average person privacy, which I found was brilliant. And I'd love to see this format being adopted, because ultimately that's what makes, people informed. And from a publisher perspective, is going back and investing in explaining the user why you're asking for those data, why you're getting those data. As Claire was saying, that will reduce the creepiness. And there is multiple ways, we could be using the CMP cookie banner just to do that. That's a great first step, and then do more educational to that, in that perspective.
And I think that if people have more knowledge of how the advertising and marketing process works and what control they have over their data, that you kind of start entering that territory with personal data management, so that if you're in the market for a new car or, God forbid, mortgage or something like that, you can flag an alert, in an ideal world, that will sort of, so you'll be part of the signal making process out there that publishers can benefit from. And, but we can only get to that point when people understand what control and power they've got. And then you're talking about, well, I would gather that would be super valuable inventory then that the industry could cluster around.
Definitely. Ben, you're going to speak?
Yeah, just to say that, indeed, I fully agree, and the responsibility falls on the publisher for the education piece. But it turns out that very few publishers have their own CMP or build it in-house.
This is true, yeah.
And honestly, it's not to be optimistic, but I have the feeling that some CMP companies are providing publishers some customization option or to be able to go in the right direction in terms of the education piece. So you've seen more CMP explain look, I'm the cookie, so if you like the content, this is why it's necessary.
Simplifying it and almost gamifying it.
So it's never, of course, it's never perfect. And a lot of things have to improve to be able to explain to all citizens why it's necessary. But I have the feeling that there is a simplification going in the right direction for some CMPs.
I want to throw a question out there. With everything going on with Google and the DOJ case, there is this potential concept that, that Chrome could be one of the things that gets broken out. And it started the conversation around browser-level consent, which, of course, has been broached in the past. Radha, I'm going to come to you, and I'm going to ask, what impact that would have on you if it switched from the publisher level and the kind of the site owned operated site level to the browser level. Is that going to make your lives easier or actually make it more challenging?
That would definitely be challenging in the sense that quite a few browsers are already implementing privacy protective measures. And so I think for it to be beneficial for us as an industry, and brands as well, we'd need to work collaboratively with the browsers to understand what that integration could look like and how we can leverage the lack of data or an alternative solution. But it definitely would pose an immediate challenge because obviously if the browser level is taking the consent and they've consented no, there's only so much information and context a public or brand can get about that potential browser.
Mimo, what's your perspective?
Yeah, same. I feel the same from a publisher perspective. It's obviously from a user perspective, this is dreamy, right? Because you won't be presented with a million of different cookie consent banner but it reduce like a leverage. From a publisher perspective, I would say the consent leverage, it's obviously hugely important. Nowadays, data, if it's not consented, it's just a liability. It's not even an asset. You can do anything with it. And obviously it has an impact on the monetization side, but also on the personalization side. So there is obviously, if you have a cookie, like a consent, a browser level, as Radha was saying, you know, that this is not black and white. Like I might need some specific consent given, and also like, you know, what's the overall opt-in rate? There is nothing I can do to try and like increase that. Yeah. So it sounds great, and there's been like reporting going on, and I know the regulator is looking into this, but I'll be cautious.
I mean, as you said, it sounds great from the user perspective, and ultimately, is that not what we should be focusing on? It's basically what Apple have done with ITP, and it's worked great for the consumer, for the user. It's worked great for Apple. It hasn't really worked great for anybody else. Benjamin, what's your perspective on browser level consent?
I mean, I think if we just all ask our family and friends, you know, what they say when they see that, they always say, I mean, I have no clue about what this is, I always say no. So I think at the end result is going to be quite similar to different type of consent. Yeah, I think it really depends on the way the education piece is defined, how didactic this is for the users to be able to make the right choice. But yeah, I think it really depends on, you know, what it could look like when Chrome is going to share some more news regarding what it will look like.
That's very true. I want to change tack again, and I want to ask about the thing that everyone's talking about, which is AI, and what role AI potentially plays in privacy and the new power of privacy, as is the panel title. Will, I'm going to ask you first.
Sure. All new tools are a question of balance. If both sides of any conversation have the same tools, then it becomes a question of efficacy and delivery of that tool, right? I have a sword, you have a sword, best swordsman wins. So I think AI will kind of it'll be a little bit like that, right? So if you take a step away from privacy...
What's AI, though? It's not a sword, is it?
It's maybe an AI sword, okay, something right, terrifying like that. But in terms, if you think, like, take a step away from privacy in terms of things that we would deliver, you know, other part of the experience support that we would deliver would be around ad quality and, you know, detecting scams and those kind of things. So the guys who are using legitimate means to deliver those kinds of ads into legitimate places are pretty effective in using tools to obfuscate the things that they do. Provided that we are more skilled at using the tools that we use to detect those kind of things, then the battle goes on, and, you know, we think that we can help you guys out. AI is going to be a similar thing. So we look at the world with AI-enabled targeting and ad creation with a little bit of trepidation, right? It's very difficult to find every ad on the internet that's going to cause someone offense because there's nudity, given the tools that we've got. Now, if those ads are delivered on the fly and created instantly using AI, it's going to be a challenging time. If we've got access to the same kind of tools to manage detection, then there's going to be a battle, and the world goes on. So I think as they've become democratized, I think the balance continues. Will people be able to crunch better data, which is what really AI means? Can they crunch better data around targeting in order to make advertising feel a little bit more comfortable? I really hope so. There'll also be a bunch of people using the same technical solutions to make advertising more challenging, and, you know, the balance will go on. And I think, you know, I'll go back to what I said originally. the regulation situation that we find ourselves in is not because of cookies or retargeting or any of those kind of things. The regulation situation we find ourselves in is one because the user experience of advertising is generally pretty poor. And aside from some of the premium environments where people are working super hard to create those environments, users are challenged by it. Their experience of advertising is poor. Browser level consent will be no thank you. And we find ourselves in a situation where you'll never guess which 10 adverts you're about to see, Lindsay.
Yeah. Yeah, well, you're painting a wonderful picture there. Thanks very much, Will. Radha, from your perspective, like, how do you see AI playing a role here? And let's bear in mind the fact that it's ultimately down to this seamless user advertising experience where they feel they understand what's being done with their data, they understand what compliance is, et cetera, et cetera.
I think with any deployment of AI, I think as a brand, you've got to really fully understand what the AI is doing. Is it explainable? Is it interoperable? Do we know what data that AI was trained on? And can we explain that back to the customer? Because if we are not fully sure what kind of risk that AI deployment will have on our broader ad tech or martech landscape, then we're just injecting in further risk. But I do think there's a place for AI if it's going to speed up some of the more, labor-intensive tasks that, could be automated. There's always a place for that. I think it could help maybe in the CMP space where it dynamically interacts with the customer in a just-in-time notice at a time maybe that they might want to lessen their consent preferences to enable them to open up to a bit more content and have that continual dialogue with the customer. And hopefully that can in turn improve their customer experience because they're kind of understanding what's happening along that journey through the use of AI.
Benjamin, how is AI helping your compliance journey?
So honestly, this is, specifically on the campaign management piece, I see there is a huge upside you can find. Same thing when it comes to all types of optimization you can run. So for me, there is absolutely no conflict with all of our practices when it comes to privacy and our positioning. So for me, it's more like a tool more than like a threat that can jeopardize our efforts.
And not some silver bullet that's going to come in and solve everything.
No.
Yeah, exactly. To talk to what Will was saying as well. I want to talk about industry associations and alliances and the role that they play in helping everybody across the supply chain, everybody in the ecosystem, understand privacy, implement privacy. We've talked a lot about the challenges, talked a lot about the fact that nothing is actually very good. Claire, obviously I'm going to come to you first as part of ISBA. What role do you think that ISBA should play?
One of influence, broadly speaking, but not just, informed influence. We spend a lot of time working with the industry, with experts, and are often in the position where we can initiate something that it would be very difficult for an individual member or partner to put together. So I'm still banging the education drum, as you've heard anyway. But, it does work when the industry comes together to make things that otherwise wouldn't have happened. And the programmatic transparency supply chain cross-industry task force that we had, for example, pulled together a very simple device to help advertisers be able to audit their programmatic supply chain. And that has sort of, taken away some of the opacity there. And I think the same approach can be taken. It can be very painful. Stakeholders come into it with their perspectives straight away. But actually, once you start getting around a table with facilitated conversations and you can see everybody's perspective, I honestly, it sounds trite, but I think that an industry that works together well is an industry that ultimately thrives. And privacy is a huge challenge, but as I said right at the beginning, it's a massive opportunity. And I think it's a massive opportunity for us to do advertising better than we have been doing it so far in programmatic.
I think everyone agrees with that. Mimo?
And rise as an industry as well. As rise as we become more mature. I think just feel like to echo that. and just say, standardization is great and helps. I feel like, Condé Nast is like large media organization. I feel for those smaller organizations that have to navigate the incredibly complex regulatory landscape. We've seen like head of consent roles and popping up recently. There is an investment in that area, but there is always like the problem that investment is expensive and not everybody can afford it. And we need to ensure that even smaller players are, put in a position where they can comply. Because again, it's like about like rising as an industry. And then, standardization, the TC fee, thanks.
Yeah.
TCF is what you go for, was it?
Yeah, exactly. So much jargons.
It's too many. I think we all agree.
Yeah,
Yes.
but that is perfect, for example, helps a lot. But there is a lot of work that can be done around, once again, education, interpretation of the laws, guidance, and open source projects, working group. The more, the better.
And I want to end by asking all of you, and it's drawing on a point that Mimo just made about standardization, the fact that obviously regulation is different in every single market or every single region. How complex is that making your lives? And is standardization, worldwide global standardization, the answer to actually kind of make compliance something that is understood by the human at the end, understood by the people that are supposed to be delivering it, and that will help people, publishers like Condé Nast, to be able to actually do the right thing effectively and get the most out of delivering a seamless advertising experience? Benjamin, I'm going to come to you first. I'm going to have a line.
Yeah, on this one, my general counsel usually says that there is, generally speaking, in global companies, a regulatory race to the bottom. And I think that's true because operationally speaking, for a tech company, this is very, very hard or almost impossible to have different data practices across every single region where you have different regulations. So I do think that you need to apply the most stringent practices globally, even if they are not always necessary. But I do think that ultimately that's a good thing for a user, for users in general. So for me, you need to have a standardization, and there is no choice.
Yeah, I do agree with that. Will?
It's not going to happen.
Never going to happen.
So,
Great.
Yeah, hands up, who wants to project manage that one?
You put your hand up.
Yeah, so it's not going to happen, right? So if you think about the way that we try and boil it down a little bit, sort of more foundationally, there are many regulatory regimes. There is the EU. Britain pulled out the EU. We're going to do something. There is a federal, perhaps in the US, no, they'll never do it federally. There's 51 different state regs, plus there's COPA, plus there's CCPA, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Right? So that's a complete challenge for everybody involved. The way that we try and sort of distill that a little bit is to say, well, yes, there are different regulatory systems, but they're all essentially built around the same thing, which is who is there. So when I go to a web page, who is there? Are they tracking? How did they get there? Right? So they're the three things that all of the structure of regulation is built upon. And then the different regulations then just say, should they be? Should they be, right? So 51 different state regulations saying should they be, different set of rules. However, the first three foundational things are consistent. Who's there? Are they tracking? How did they get there? And if you know those three things, then you can get through the should they be questions. Now, I think that the burden of those things falls more easily on larger corps who have the resource to be able to manage. But I would say to anybody who is struggling with those things, think about the foundational levels. And there are people that can help with that. There are in-house resources, there are people you can outsource. But think about it in that way. Who's there? Are they tracking? How did they get there? And if you know those three things, then you can fit them to the regulatory regime that is relevant to the situation you're working in. I'm not saying it's perfect, but I don't think we're going to fix it by sitting back until the Global Data Regulation Act rolls out, because it's absolutely never going to happen.
So we should have no hope of this then?
We should have no hope.
No.
No.
Okay,
None at all.
awesome. Mimo, obviously, you're the global organization that Will was just referring to.
We would love a global data privacy, right? It's like tax.
It sounds like a Google interview question. How much would you need to pay me to roll out a global data privacy policy for the entire world? A lot.
Yeah, well, put a number on that. Yeah, I mean, it's it's fragmented. Obviously, Europe, you know, everyone like everyone looks at GDPR as like, you know, gold standard here. But then when you look at what is happening in different regions, then everyone is like adopting their version, more stringent or less stringent. And we see the same happening in the US with new countries like coming up and like, you know, coming up with their own like laws. More standardization from that perspective, it's definitely like a cry to the and ask for the like global sort of policymakers. Federal law in the US would be great, maybe in a few years' time. But yeah, it's definitely like it's a burden from like perspective of the companies that are like operating in this environment again, because it means that you need to be set up. You need to be investing resources and like be more strategic, because up until like a few years ago, you know, tactical, we start talking about privacy officer, right? And then like GDPR was implemented and fine, no one like cared about that any longer. Being more strategic, like trying to understand and like build up teams and operation to make sure that we can use that as an opportunity. And so that's, I guess that's like, you know, again, a challenge, but.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, a huge challenge that's never going to happen. Claire?
Well, I'm sure that Radha can put more flesh on the bone, since she does have a global role within a global advertiser, and will be able to talk about the importance. The only point I want to make is that I know from my members, none of them want to be non-compliant. They all want to be compliant. And most of them are trading internationally, if not globally. And what they will tend to do is to reach what is our governance structure, which includes compliance, but it also includes ethics. Are we doing the right thing? And that will tend to be operated at corporate level. And as far as I can see, the main player in the game for privacy and data protection is the GDPR, which is, being adopted in the US. I think we've got, 13, 14 state laws now. Obviously, Australia, APAC, Singapore, it's not just a European thing. And I don't think we'll see much divergence in the UK when we get our new data bill out. It'd be madness beyond, on top of existing madness.
We're already quite insane as it is.
Are you suggesting that we are resistant to political madness?
Say again?
Are you suggesting we're resistant to political madness?
God, no.
No, definitely
not. Not remotely.
And Radha, finally to you, is it that they're all so similar that it doesn't really matter, or is it actually a challenge, and how are you?
So I'd say it is quite a challenge, because whilst we don't have one global data privacy standard, the GDPR is the gold standard that we would operate against, and therefore the tooling and technology we have has got to be able to apply that globally. But then we do need to allow for local flexibilities. That is hard to manage, because obviously there's so many different nuances there. But if you're balancing up the commercial implications of applying a global standard where maybe the same stringency doesn't need to apply, there is going to be some internal conversations to be had. But then balancing that against the efficacy of maybe lessening a standard in a jurisdiction that doesn't need to abide by GDPR, but the consumer at the end of the day is still a human, they still have the same human rights, and how do we really navigate that? So there's definitely a conversation to be had. It's not a blanket one-size-fits-all, but I think it's useful, and it's a luxury at the business I'm in, that you can invest in the tooling and technology to allow for that flexibility, but that flexibility can't just be deployed without really thinking about the ethics behind that.
And I'm going to end it on that note. It's lunchtime, you'll be pleased to know. Thank you so much to my panelists, Benjamin, Will, Mimo, Claire, and Radha. Give them a round of applause. Thank you very much.